everyone, and thanks for coming to my talk, and thanks to the University of Edinburgh for inviting me. It's a great honor to be here today. So I'll be talking today about how we express our feelings and how we talk about them. And intuitively, these are two very different things. Imagine, for instance, that you drop something heavy on your foot and you yell something like, ouch, to express your frustration. Intuitively, it's very different from you simply stating, I'm frustrated, or I'm in pain, or I don't like this. In this first case, you seem to be performatively expressing your emotions, while in the second case, you seem to be communicating some factual information about them. And I will be referring to the meaning that you are conveying in this first case as non-truth-conditional meaning, in particular in relation to affective non-truth-conditional meaning. I will often be using the term expressive meaning. And in the second case, we're dealing with what I will be referring to as truth-conditional meaning. And in my talk today, I will start by introducing this distinction in greater detail. And then in the first substantial portion of my talk, I will show you some empirical manifestations of this distinction for words and their parts, and I will discuss the implications of these data for our understanding of the architecture of grammar. And by doing so, I will justify a very clear-cut separation of these two types of meaning in our formal linguistic theories. And in the second portion of the talk, I will show you that some of the same distinctions hold for affect-related meaning when it's conveyed through words and when it's conveyed through some other means like facial expressions or prosody or gestures, despite the existing tendency to label all expression of any affect-related meaning through these secondary channels as paralinguistic and something that we as formal linguists shouldn't worry about. Now, at this point, let me issue a quick content warning. Many of the examples that I will be focusing on today contain some pretty strong vocabulary. Now, I myself will refrain from producing some of the strongest examples, but they will be there on the slides in case this is something that bothers you. Okay, so this distinction between truth-conditional and non-truth-conditional meaning, what is it actually about? Well, it's premised on the fact that we don't only use language to communicate and negotiate our beliefs about the world, so to make assertions or ask questions, but also for a variety of other functions. And in particular, we can use language as an outlet for our immediate feelings. Also to perform a variety of social functions, but today I will focus on affective meaning. And truth-conditional meaning is associated with this first function of language, that is with communicating beliefs about the world. And in formal semantics, which is my field, we are used to modeling this kind of meaning in terms of things that can be true or false, or more specifically, in terms of conditions under which various utterances can be true or false, hence the term truth-conditional. Now, these meanings are negotiable in the sense that you can accept or reject them. Furthermore, they don't require immediacy, that is, they don't have to be about anything immediate in the context of utterance, and they're typically non-performative. Now, non-truth-conditional meanings, on the other hand, are not meant to be true or false, and they're therefore non-negotiable. Sometimes you even produce utterances that carry these meanings without having any external observer in mind, not even yourself. And they are highly performative. That is, when you produce an expression that carries this non-truth-conditional meaning, you achieve the goals associated with this meaning by virtue of uttering this expression. Now, this distinction is very intuitive, but should we actually strive to have a very clear-cut separation between truth-conditional and non-truth-conditional meanings in our formal semantic theories? And some people think, yes, we should. A very well-known example of that is Expressive Semantics in POTS 2007. There, expressives, that is, expressions carrying this non-truth-conditional affective meaning, are expressions that directly change the context of utterance instead of outputting something that can be true or false. But other people say no, and they've been trying to assimilate expressives to some type or other of truth-conditional meaning. For instance, a positive relative clauses, as in Leah's bringing her dog, which, by the way, I like. Presuppositions, that is, these special kind of inferences contributed by specific lexical items. For instance, the sentence, Mia stopped smoking, presupposes that Mia used to smoke. And also certain adjectives with an evaluative meaning component. For instance, the adjective lovely in Leah's bringing her lovely dog in the context in which Leah only has one dog. Now, I will not have time to go over all these parallels and show you how exactly they fall apart, but I will focus on this last parallel here. Now, at this point, you might be asking, do we have any independent evidence for the special status of this non-truth-conditional meanings? And there is some evidence from language disorders and some other neurolinguistic evidence suggesting that truth-conditional and non-truth-conditional meanings are processed differently in the brain. But I will not talk about this. I'm not a neurolinguist. I know very little about the brain and language in the brain. I'm more of an armchair linguist. And even when I collect quantitative data, these data are still typically based on introspective judgments. Now, can I, as an armchair linguist, offer any insights into this question? Well, I believe so. Otherwise, I wouldn't be giving this talk. In fact, I believe that we can get very fine-grained evidence from purely introspection data that pertains to this question. However, to properly understand how this truth-conditional versus non-truth-conditional distinction operates within a larger architecture of grammar, we can't just be looking at standalone utterances like those that we started with. We need to be looking at how truth-conditional and non-truth-conditional meanings come together within a single utterance. And this is what we're going to do next. So we are now in that portion of my talk where I will be trying to convince you that there are some tangible empirical consequences of this distinction between truth-conditional and non-truth-conditional meanings that we want to capture in our formal theories. And the first contrast that we will look at is the contrast between these expressive items like damn and these truth-conditional evaluative adjectives like lovely. Indeed, the two can be used in a pretty similar fashion. So for instance, in the context in which Leah only has one dog, you can say something like, Leah didn't bring her damn dog. Or you can say something like, Leah didn't bring her lovely dog. And in both cases, you seem to be saying, Leah didn't bring her dog. And in addition to that, you're conveying some attitude towards Leah's dog on the side. However, only truth-conditional evaluative adjectives like lovely can be used to pick a dog out of a larger set. For instance, if you ask me which of her dogs is Leah bringing, I can say the lovely one or the disgusting one. But I cannot say the damn one. This is just not grammatical, and this is something that linguists usually mark with an asterisk. And if I say the bloody one, this can only mean, the one covered in blood. It cannot mean the one that I don't like. That is, it no longer has this target interpretation. And I mark this fact here with a pound sign. Now, linguistically speaking, what these data show us is that truth-conditional meanings can be at issue or not at issue. That is, they can be actively contributing to addressing some current issue, for instance, addressing a question, but they don't have to be. However, non-truth conditional meanings empirically are never at issue. And This is because they aren't meant to ever address any issues. So this distinction between at issue and not at issue uses doesn't apply to them. And therefore, we should model non-truth conditional meanings in a way that makes sure that they can never be at issue, and thus analyzing them in the same way as those evaluative adjectives like lovely in certain contexts doesn't seem to be the right way to go. Now, the second phenomenon that I want to focus on is what I like to call the parasitic behavior of non-truth conditional meanings. Now, non-truth conditional meanings can parasitize on otherwise truth conditional utterances in various ways without interacting with the hosts semantically in an expected way. For instance, if you see that someone is apparently about to hurt your dog, you can yell at them, "Step away from my goddamn dog." And in this case, this adjective goddamn seems to be syntactically combining with this noun dog. However, you're not conveying any kind of negative attitude towards your dog. Instead, this adjective seems to be serving as an outlet for your heightened emotions caused by something utterance external. But you cannot use adjectives like lovely or disgusting in the same way. If you say, step away from my lovely dog, or step away from my disgusting dog, it has to be that you have a certain attitude towards your dog. You cannot use these adjectives as an outlet for your immediate emotions caused by something utterance external. In fact, even though I keep calling these expressive items like damn here adjectives, sometimes they seem to be integrating into larger utterances in ways that these other adjectives like lovely or disgusting cannot. So for instance, if you're hearing some loud and unpleasant music, you can say something like, "God, I hope this music bloody stops." Or if you're hearing some extremely pleasant music and you're overwhelmed by this aesthetic experience, you can say something like, "Oh, I hope this music never bloody stops." But you cannot use these adjectives like lovely or disgusting in the same way. You cannot say things like, "I hope this music disgusting stops," or "I hope this music never lovely stops." Now, in this case, it's not even obvious that these expressive items here are even part of the same syntactic structure as the host utterance. It could be that they're integrating with the host utterance at the level of prosody, but not at the level of syntax. Of course, the problem with English is that it's kind of hard to tell because English doesn't have a lot of overt morphology. Thankfully, other languages exist, and one of them happens to be my native language, Russian. And in Russian, we see some clear evidence that some expressions that carry non-truth conditional meanings do integrate syntactically with their hosts, but they don't have to interact with them semantically in an expected way. In particular, Russian has a whole range of affective suffixes, but some of these suffixes can exhibit this syntactical parasitic behavior, while others cannot. So for instance, we have a lot of diminutives, which can also be used to express affection or this feeling of being overwhelmed by cuteness. For example, if I'm talking to my dog, I can say something like, "О, я сейчас налью тебе свеженькой водички в мисочку, а потом мы быстренько пойдем гулятеньки." So what I just said, truth conditionally amounts to, "I will pour you some fresh water into the bowl and then we'll quickly go for a walk." But I also have these diminutive suffixes sprinkled all over my utterance that express this affection. But of course, this affection that I'm feeling isn't towards fresh things or water or bowls or fast events or walking events. It's towards the dog. In contrast, we also have derogatory or pejorative suffixes, and those cannot be used in the same way. So if I say something like 10, if I say, "Впустите этого старика на его собачару," or Впустите этого старикашку, его собаченцию. So here, these suffixes have to encode some negative attitude, derogatory or pejorative, towards the old man and his dog. I cannot use them to express derogation towards something utterance external, for instance, towards the addressee. But of course, in both cases, we're dealing with suffixes. They are bound morphemes. They cannot be used as standalone words. So, no matter how cute your dog is, you cannot just go like oink or yank to express your affection. And these suffixes also follow all sorts of rules that suffixes routinely follow in Russian. So what these data seem to show us is that expressions that carry non-truth-conditional meanings can be syntactically parasitic, but expressions that carry truth-conditional meanings cannot. They have to semantically also interact with their syntactic sisters. And what this seems to tell us about the architecture of grammar is that truth-conditional and non-truth-conditional meanings are processed using distinct cognitive resources. And thus we can compute two independent meanings, one truth conditional and the other one non-truth conditional, simultaneously, that is within a single syntactic structure, without causing a cognitive overload, something that we cannot do with two independent truth conditional meanings. But syntax, however, seems to be oblivious to this distinction. Syntax will happily combine various expressions regardless of whether they carry truth conditional or non-truth conditional meanings. Now, Russian also provides some evidence that we do have prosodically parasitic expressions that carry non-truth conditional meanings. That is, we have expressions that only seem to integrate with their hosts at the level of prosody without integrating with them syntactically, at least not locally. In particular, Russian also has a range of expressive particles, most of which are extremely obscene. Now, these guys don't seem to interact with their surroundings morphosyntactically at all, and you can kind of sprinkle them all over your utterance, and as long as they land in prosodically appropriate positions, you're good. So for instance, you can be running around looking for your pen and getting increasingly agitated, and you can yell something like, "Где, блин, моя ручка?" Or "Где моя, блин, ручка?" Or "Где моя ручка, блин?" Or even, "Где, блин, моя, блин, ручка, блин?" if you're really, really agitated. And these can also be used as standalone utterances, unlike those suffixes or actually some of the English items. So again, if you drop something heavy on your foot, you can yell something like, "Blin." And finally, non-truth conditional meanings can also be sublexical parasites, because a single lexical item can carry both a truth conditional and a non-truth conditional meaning. A good example of this are English expressives used as high degree modifiers or intensifiers, if you like. So you can say things like, "The movie is damn good." And intuitively, it means something like the movie is very good. And this high degree meaning component is truth conditional, and furthermore, it's typically at issue in the sense that the sentence, "The movie is damn good," usually describes a smaller set of situations than the sentence, "The movie is good," unmodified in most contexts. Now, this high degree meaning in this expressive degree modifiers, of course, has to semantically interact with its syntactic sister. But these expressive degree modifiers still have their expressive component, and this expressive component can still perform its expressive function. That is, it can still serve as an outlet for your immediate emotions caused by something utterance external. Here's a naturalistic example that I believe illustrates this. So this is an excerpt from Daniel Craig's interview when he was asked if Phoebe Waller-Bridge was a diversity hire for Bond, and he got angry and he went on a rant. So he said, "Look, we're having a conversation about Phoebe's gender here, which is effing ridiculous. She's a great writer, yada, yada, yada. I know what you're trying to do, but it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. She's an effing great writer, one of the best English writers around. Now, these two instances of the F word do seem to serve as high degree modifiers. That is, he is trying to say something about the degree of ridiculousness and the degree of greatness. However, they also seem to serve as outlets for his immediate anger, but this anger isn't about the property of being ridiculous or the property of being great. This anger seems to be caused by something utterance external, namely that question, and it seems to be directed at the addressee. Okay, so let's have a quick interim summary here. So I've just shown you two specific ways in which truth-conditional and non-truth-conditional affect-related meanings are observably distinct. So first, truth-conditional meanings can be at issue or not at issue, but non-truth-conditional meanings can never be at issue because they're never meant to address any issues to begin with. And second, non-truth-conditional meanings can be parasitic in various ways in which truth-conditional meanings cannot. Suggesting that semantics does treat these two types of meaning differently, while other levels of representation might not. And I take these two facts to be counter evidence against analysis that try to reduce non-truth conditional meanings to some type of truth conditional meanings. Now, let's move on to the second portion of this talk, where I will be trying to convince you that we observe a very similar typology of affective meanings in this quote unquote secondary channels as we do with words. So let's look at some case studies. So the first case study is going to be about this progression of meaning, if you like, from performative expression of immediate affect to non-performative, non-immediate affect to degree modifier meanings with an attitudinal component. And we will focus on this progression for surprise and surprise-related meanings. And we will start by looking at words. So you can performatively express your immediate feeling of being surprised via interjections in language. So for instance, you can say something like, wow, Mia got drunk. When you're directly observing some evidence of Mia having got drunk, or maybe you just learned about this. And in this case, you are experiencing this feeling of being surprised at the moment of speech. So in this case, we're dealing with a non-truth conditional affective meaning. But you can also talk about your non-immediate attitude about some fact. For instance, you can say things like, surprisingly, Mia got drunk, or astonishingly, Mia got drunk. In this case, you seem to be saying that Mia got drunk, and also, by the way, I find this surprising or astonishing. It did not match my expectations, but you don't have to be actually experiencing any strong feeling of being surprised at the moment of speech, and you can be talking about something that happened, say, yesterday. So in this case, we're dealing with a truth conditional meaning, even though in this case, it's backgrounded. And finally, we can also use adverbs like surprisingly or astonishingly as degree modifiers. For instance, you can say things like, Mia got surprisingly drunk, or Mia got astonishingly drunk. And here it's not the fact that Mia got drunk that I find surprising, but the extent to which she got drunk. And as we said before, degree modifiers contribute to a conditional meaning, which furthermore is typically at issue. Now, we can observe the same typology of surprise-related meanings for facial expressions, in particular for this facial expression whose core component is eyes wide open. So I can use this facial expression to express performatively my immediate surprise or shock. For instance, if I see something that I find surprising or shocking, I can go like this. And I can even be producing some speech while holding this facial expression. So I can be saying something like, oh, wow, what are we going to do now? But there doesn't seem to be any substantial interaction between the facial expression and the co-occurring spoken utterance at the level of meaning. But you can also use the same facial expression to convey your non-immediate attitude towards some fact, just like we did with those sentence level adverbials like surprisingly. So I can say something like, yesterday there was a party and Mia got drunk. And here I'm aligning this facial expression with the second part of my utterance to convey the meaning that I find this fact that Mia got drunk unexpected. But again, I don't have to actually be actively experiencing any feeling of being surprised. And finally, we can also use this facial expression to convey high degree meanings. For instance, I can say something like, yesterday there was a party and Mia got drunk. And again, here the interpretation seems to be along the lines of Mia got very drunk. Now, as you probably noticed, in all these cases, these facial expressions were also accompanied by some form of converging prosody. However, the two can convey the relevant meanings independently of one another, especially in the case of those degree meanings. For instance, you probably didn't have to see my face in this last example to understand that I'm trying to say that Mia got very drunk. Similarly, facial expressions can contribute the relevant meanings without any auditory signal, in particular when they co-occur with silent gestures. So for instance, if you ask me, how was the movie? I can just go like this. And I seem to be simply saying, look, the movie was good. However, I can do something slightly different. I can go like this. And in this case, this right hand gesture is the same, but I'm adding some additional facial expressions and a shrug and this left hand gesture. And all these things jointly seem to be conveying the meaning that, the movie was good, but it wasn't that good. So here we're actually dealing with some sort of low degree or attenuating meaning. And of course, I can also convey this high degree meaning by combining this thumbs up gesture with our eyes wide open facial expression, right? So I can go like this. Now I want to show you some naturalistic examples of the phenomena that we just talked about to convince you that these phenomena don't only exist in my head, and people do sometimes produce examples like this in the wild, and we can interpret them. So here in 23, we will have examples of this eyes wide open facial expression and converging prosody used as a high degree modifier. Now, I really like this example because here the speaker will have two contrastive instances of the same spoken word, faster. But the first one will be unmodified, but the second one will be modified with this facial expression and prosody, showing very clearly that in this case, this facial expression and prosody do actually affect the truth conditions of the utterance, because if you drop them, you will end up with an infelicitous utterance. So here is the context for this example. So the speaker is playing a drinking game while reading the book, and she's also sick. And this is what she says.
The problem with doing this with vodka is you get drunker faster. The problem with doing this while you're sick and drinking vodka is you get drunker faster.
Right, so we have this contrast between faster, unmodified, and faster. So even faster, if you like. And here's another example. So here, first, we will again have these contrastive degree meanings conveyed through facial expressions and prosody. So the speaker is reminiscing about giving birth to her fourth child, and she will be comparing high intensity contractions to low intensity contractions. But then she will shift to the perspective of her past self, and she will be using the same eyes wide open expression to performatively express her immediate feelings at the time. Okay, let's look at this example now.
And then I have like a contraction. If you've ever had a baby, you know, like there's contractions and then there are contractions. I knew it was real. I was like, oh my God, that is a contraction.
So first we have contractions compared to contractions. And then we have this performative eyes wide open, where she says, oh my God, that is a contraction. Now I want to talk about negative affect. Again, we can performatively express our immediate negative affect as a reaction to something in the context of utterance through various means, interjections, vocalizations, facial expressions, prosody, what have you. So we can do things like ew, or oh, or, and so on and so forth. But we can also use some of the same facial expressions and prosody in a more targeted way. Once again, we can align them with specific subparts of our utterances to convey some non-immediate attitudes towards the meaning of those subparts. So here's a naturalistic example of that from Sherlock. I will first play the clip.
But I'd have friends.
So this was a very short example, so I'm going to play it again.
But I'd have friends.
So here he's conveying his contempt specifically for the notion of friendship by aligning this facial expression and prosody with the word friends. In the next example, we don't actually see the face of the speaker, but we can still hear the contempt for Morgan family as conveyed through prosody. By the way, spoilers for the first season of Dexter, if you care.
And while you were being raised by the Morgan family, I only had the memory of a family.
Here's another example. So here we're not dealing with contempt, but with something that I like to call prosodic eye roll. So here we have the speaker on the left who is reading a line from a book, but she's doing so from the perspective of the preteen protagonist. And notice how she produces the word parents.
Glenn sometimes acts like a wimp, but he's more fun than parents.
So here, once again, she's just targeting this word parents with this prosody. And we seem to associate this kind of flat, plateauy, prolonged intonation with the lack of the speaker investment, boredom even. In fact, we see something similar happening when we try to convey this low degree attenuating meanings through prosody. So here's an example of this. Notice at how the speaker produces the word fine at the end.
I just had to see you one last time because I hooked up with Alexander the Great, and it was more like Alexander the Fine.
Fine. Again, there is this pretty flat, lifeless, if you like, intonation that seems to convey this lack of speaker interest or engagement. So we seem to observe some general motive here. So we start with some performative, often uncontrolled, often subconscious expression of immediate emotion through these secondary channels, which we can then recognize and use in a more controlled and regularized way to convey truth-conditional meanings, including some pretty complex truth-conditional meanings like those degree meanings. And one last thing that I want to talk about is this use of these choppy gestures, prosody, punctuation, emoji, that I like to call expressive beats in spoken and written communication. So for instance, if you're doing something that I don't like and I want you to stop, I can say, will you please stop? Or I can say, will you please stop? And clearly in the second case, I am expressing these heightened emotions through these choppy gestures and choppy rhythm. And we can emulate this choppy rhythm in written communication by having this choppy punctuation. And more recently, we can also emulate both the gestures and the prosody by using this clapping emoji. Now, notice that these expressive beats seem to be what I previously called prosodic parasites, because they do integrate with the host utterances prosodically in spoken communication, and in written communication, we emulate this prosodic structure. But there is no reason to believe that they integrate with the host utterances syntactically. Furthermore, it seems that it's this choppy arrangement that is primarily responsible for this expressive effect. But the beats themselves, the atomic expressions within these sequences, can carry additional meanings. So for instance, I can say something like, hey, we have 5 minutes. And here I seem to be both expressing my irritation through this choppy arrangement, but I'm also telling you to hurry up, and the snapping gesture can be used on its own to tell someone to. And this second meaning is seemingly truth conditional. So it looks like when we have these prosodic parasites, we can sometimes sneak in some small additional bits of truth conditional meaning as well. And one last example that I want to leave you with is in 32. So here, again, we have this expressive arrangement of emoji, but the emoji themselves seem to carry some additional meaning. And it's hard to tell what this meaning is without knowing the broader context, which I don't know because this example is from a secondary source. But it's possible that this flag here is meant to performatively express one's love for the US. So it's possible that it's some sort of social meaning, if you like. Okay, now let's wrap up. So I hope to have accomplished 2 things today. First, I hope to have convinced you that this distinction between truth-conditional and non-truth-conditional affect-related meanings has very tangible empirical consequences, which we can observe even through purely introspection-based data, and which we want to reflect in our formal models of meaning and grammar in general. And second, I hope to have shown you that we observe a very similar typology of affect-related meanings across channels. And we should thus analyze this typology in a uniform way. Now, that's all I have for today. Thanks for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions.